All right, we are live. Hello, Facebook world and beyond. Welcome to a conversation today with two awesome leaders out there doing incredible work. We have Erin Madison and we have Rafa coming from incredible organizations as well. We'll talk about more. So let's get into it. In 2021, the Womxn Project Education Fund, which is the organization I'm on the board. My name is Jocelyn Floyd, by the way. And the Louisiana Coalition for Reproductive Freedom launched a series of virtual events called the RJ Convos, bringing together leaders to share insight on a range of hot topics in the moment and in the movement for reproductive health, rights, and justice. We talk about sex and redistricting, young people and fake clinics, and much more. We're going to extend that now and continue to do the work together to amplify great work through our mutual aid spotlights throughout December. And today in this conversation, we continue that as well. Both Womxn Project and LCRF are working in our states and throughout the country to have the hard and necessary conversations to educate and engage folks and to build our collective strength for real and lasting change. We're thrilled to have presentations from truly esteemed partners tonight who are fighting back against the bans on our bodies and the attempts to deny our bodily autonomy. As we await a decision from the Supreme Court on questions about the legal context of abortion in this country, I want to emphasize that we are committed to ensuring that when someone needs an abortion, they can get it. A piece of this important work is to ensure that if someone wants or needs to self-manage their abortion, they can get pills, have the info and support they need, and understand the legal implications and where to get the help. So we're grateful to ReproAction for all their hard work, education, advocacy around safely obtaining and using abortion pills to take and keep control over our bodies and decisions. Courts and politicians do not control our futures, we do. So ReproAction is out there spreading the gospel of abortion pills, and their co-founder and executive director, Erin Madison, is here to share info about their work to educate and expand access to abortion pills. And then just to give you a heads up, coming to, we're thrilled to be speaking. Wow, excuse me. We're honored to be joined by the Repro Legal Defense Fund's Rafa Kadvali, who will also give us more background on the war on abortion drugs and the way it is an affront to human rights. So we'll start with you, Erin, and then we'll head into you, Rafa. Okay. So then just a little bit more about Erin is that while Erin's out there doing this incredible advocacy as well, they are sharing the work and educating the access, sharing info about their work to educate and expand access to abortion pills. They also do great work to spotlight the harm of fake clinics. So Erin, I'm gonna hand off to you because I'm a little more tongue-tied than I'd like to be right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jocelyn, and thank you for convening this. And it's a real honor to be on with you and the Womxn Project, and also with Rafa from the Repro Legal Defense Fund. So much respect for all of your work. So let's just dive right into it, shall we? Yeah. We know that that the Supreme Court is on the precipice of likely overturning Roe v. Wade, the decision that has affirmed the federal constitutional right for abortion for 50 years. And we know that if and when that happens, which could be any day now, as early as perhaps Wednesday morning, that more than half of the states in the nation, according to the Guttmacher Institute, will pretty much immediately cease to offer in-clinic abortion services. So I want to say at the outset that times have changed drastically since the pre-Roe days. We are now in a very different paradigm because of the existence of abortion pills. Abortion opponents are brutal, but one thing that they do not ever have the power to do is to put these pills back in the bottle. Simply put, abortion is unstoppable, and specifically medication abortion is unstoppable. Now, I want to add a little nuance to this to say that this isn't a panacea, and we absolutely need to increase access to in-clinic abortion care, and abortion pills are not going to be accessible to everyone. But that said, self-managed abortion is a huge thing in this country already, and it is about to get much, much bigger. So let's talk a little bit. There's two primary ways that people self-manage abortion with pills. One is using the combination of mifepristone and misoprostol. A very common way that folks are getting their hands on it right now, if they're not getting it through their medical provider, is through Aid Access, which is a organization founded by Dr. Rebecca Gompertz that is shipping abortion pills to people in all 50 states in consideration of state laws. Another service is or not service, excuse me. Another method is just misoprostol alone, and that's really where I'm going to focus, because misoprostol. So just using that pill on its own, people are often, this will be easier for people to obtain outside of the medical system. I'm not going to share how people are accessing misoprostol outside of the traditional medical system. I know that there are people watching this, unfortunately, who mean grave harm, and I wouldn't want to do anything to cut off access that currently exists. But let's talk about misoprostol, because specifically, I'm going to focus on the first 12 weeks in a pregnancy, how to self-manage an abortion with misoprostol pills. So the first thing to do is to determine gestational age, and a person can do that by counting back from their last menstrual period. And within the first 12 weeks, that's what I'm covering today. To confirm that, a person can take a pregnancy test, and a person can count backwards from there. So a person would need 12 tablets of misoprostol that are 200 micrograms each, and just the basics of how this works. So first, a person would take 4 of the 12 pills that are 200 micrograms each and put them under the tongue or in their cheeks and hold them there for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes elapse, the person can swallow those remaining, any remnants that may still be in their mouth from the pills, and wait 3 hours. So set a timer, wait 3 hours. 3 hours, do the exact same thing over again. 4 pills of 200 micrograms each in the cheeks or under the tongue, hold them there for 30 minutes, and then a person would swallow any remnants that might still exist in their mouth. Again, set a timer for 3 hours, wait 3 hours, and then take those final 4 pills, do the exact same thing in the cheek or under the tongue for 30 minutes, and swallowing any remnants that haven't dissolved. A person will know that the medication is working when they experience side effects. So that can include cramps and pain, nausea, vomiting and diarrhea, menstrual bleeding. And specifically the bleeding, so to be very clear about like what constitutes expected bleeding, it's not considered, a person would be bleeding a considerable amount. But it's not considered heavy bleeding unless if a person is fully soaking through 2 menstrual pads, more than 2 menstrual pads in an hour for more than 2 consecutive hours. That would be kind of the threshold at which a person would seek medical attention, and we'll talk some more about that. This works generally 80 to 85% of the time on its own. And if the pills don't work, a person can try again 3 days later if they can get their hands on more pills. After the self-managed abortion, nothing should go in the vagina for 2 days after the abortion. And I mean nothing, no fingers, no tampons, nothing. So let's talk a little bit about things that person needs to keep in mind. First of all, a person should confirm they are pregnant before taking these pills. It's not a walk in the park. And so it's more trouble than a person wants to go through unless they absolutely know that they are pregnant. Second, that person should make sure that it's less than 12 weeks pregnant. Again, looking back at the date of the last menstrual period and counting forward. A person should make a plan and arrange to have someone with them that they trust as an emotional support person. That way, if a person, both wants to be supported, also that support person may want to have ibuprofen on hand in case if a person experiences nausea. A person should never do this if they use an IUD, because the cramping would actually cause an IUD, their uterus could get perforated. And in specific, if there's concern about ectopic pregnancy, misoprostol will not solve that problem. So a person needs to go and see a medical provider if they're concerned about that. And ideally, a person should be within 2 hours drive to a hospital when taking this medication. It's really important that a person is doing this on their own free will and they're not being forced. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about complications. So first of all, if a person is experiencing heavy blood loss, that is more than 2 maxi pads fully soaked per hour for more than 2 hours consecutive. A high fever, meaning higher than 102, or severe pain lasting for more than a few hours. If a person is experiencing complications and needs to seek medical care, and I want to underscore that complications are very rare, but if a person does need to seek medical care, they should know that the primary risk is legal and not medical, and specifically that the treatment for self-managed abortion with pills and complications is exactly the same as treatment for miscarriage, and that there are no blood tests to detect that a person is taking misoprostol. So there's no medical reason for a person to disclose that they have taken pills. Doing so may only expose them to legal risk. And I know that Rafa will have much more to say about that. I'm very excited to listen to them and what they have to share. So that's an overview of how these pills work. It's really actually quite simple. We keep the World Health Organization protocol, which is what I just shared, on our website. We also at ReproAction.org, we also have up there a new page that also offers really explicit guidance for people who may be wondering if they need to go to a hospital and seek more care, because there have been such deep concerns about that. So just want to plug that there are a lot of great resources. We've got them on our website. The M&A hotline provides practical support to people while they are seeking care. Women Help Women is another invaluable service. And then also just shout out again to the Repro Legal Defense Fund and the incredible work that they're doing. So I will pass it back. I think you're going to play a short video from ReproAction, and then I'm going to be taking all kinds of notes from Rafa's talk. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you so much, Erin. So let me pull this video up for y'all. Okay. I need to get hosts access, please. Great.
Ready to learn about self-managed abortion with pills? Misoprostol is safe and effective, and the World Health Organization protocol for self-managed abortion with pills is about 85% effective in terminating a pregnancy during the first 12 weeks. Here are the steps from the World Health Organization. A person will need 12 misoprostol tablets of 200 micrograms each. Place 4 pills under the tongue for 30 minutes and let them dissolve. Swallow any remnants of the pills after 30 minutes. After 3 hours, repeat the process again with 4 pills under the tongue for 30 minutes, then swallow any remnants. After another 3 hours, repeat the process with 4 pills under the tongue for 30 minutes, then swallow any remnants. A person will know the medication is working when they experience the following side effects: cramps, menstrual bleeding, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Though uncomfortable, these side effects are normal and indicate the medication is working. While very rare, complications can occur. Signs of complication that require medical attention include heavy bleeding that fully soaks through more than 2 sanitary pads per hour for more than 2 hours, severe pain that does not go away after taking medication, a fever of over 102 degrees Fahrenheit, vaginal discharge that smells bad. Treatment is the same as the treatment for complications of a spontaneous miscarriage. And someone self-managing abortion with pills does not need to disclose taking misoprostol to receive care in the rare cases where complications occur. There are no blood tests to show a person has taken misoprostol. It shouldn't be this way, but disclosing a self-managed abortion with pills puts a person at legal risk. To date, there have been at least 20 arrests of women who have ended their own pregnancies outside of a medical setting in the United States. It's safe and it's effective. No matter what the law says, self-managed abortion with pills is here to stay. Learn more at reproaction.org/SMA.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
¿Sabes qué es el misoprostol? El misoprostol.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that video being created, Erin. And also, I'll get back on track a little bit here. All right. So, so we will make sure that we have this content and this data shared with folks so that you can look at that in the chat. If people have questions, we have someone answering those questions for you in situ. So there is another great video that we really do like, but it's a little bit longer and it's more in depth on the politics around abortion pills that we will share in this chat as well. Self-managed care is a powerful tool for empowered termination when someone doesn't want to continue a pregnancy. It is also an important way to continue to protect and even expand access to abortion. So right now, about half of abortions are done through the use of pills, as we just heard from Erin in that video. And that's why politicians are trying to limit the use of pills and even to criminalize providers and people who try to self-manage. This is part of an anti-abortion and white supremacist agenda that serves to take away our rights and further fuel mass incarceration. Again, as I said earlier, in a little bit more spaghetti mouth, but I'm feeling a little clearer, we are honored to be joined by Repro Freedom Legal Defense Fund's Rafa Kadvali. I apologize for hacking your name, Rafa, who will also give us more background on the war on abortion drugs and the way it is an affront to human rights that has already harmed so many people, particularly those who are policed and criminalized most in our current system, folks who are poor individuals, folks of color, young people, and immigrants. Rafa will also share info about the Legal Defense Fund's work to cover bail and fund strong defenses for people who are arrested, or prosecuted for self-managed abortion. Rafa, I know that you're much more eloquent with your words, so thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We look forward to learning a ton from you. No pressure.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm certainly not any more eloquent. It's the end of a Monday.
It's a tough time. It's just
totally. It's a tough time. I feel like Erin kind of set the bar pretty high. So
yeah.
Let's see how I can do. So my name is Rafa Kadvai. I'm the director of the Repro Legal Defense Fund, which is housed at If When How. I'm a former public defender and I practiced largely in Brooklyn and the Bronx. I'm also queer, a Muslim parent to a toddler. And yeah, I do this work because I think that we obviously have a huge problem in this country of how we're willing to treat pregnant people or people who want to end their pregnancies. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the Repro Legal Defense Fund, and really it's so that people know this resource exists should they need it, and then talk a little bit about what self-managed abortion is, what the risks of self-managed abortion are legally. You heard a lot about the medical sort of landscape for the most common way that self-managed abortions take place, which is through pills. And then really, I guess, like what things look like in this landscape right now, what this landscape means for people. So to start, the Repro Legal Defense Fund is a bail fund, but also sort of more expansive than that. It's a legal defense fund, which means that we really support folks to bridge the gap between getting sort of a defense of any kind of defense to a really like holistic, thoughtful, high quality defense. We really want to make sure that resources aren't the reason someone can't fight back against the power of the state. And so we try to bridge that financial gap. So primarily we fund bail, meaning if someone is arrested and then a judge sets bail in an amount before they can be released, we will pay bail or bond in that case, if the case is accepted. And then we provide also other legal support, which means financial assistance by virtue of attorney's fees or the costs of mitigation experts, investigators, social workers, really just anything someone needs in a case. It's sort of case by case. And we largely started out a year ago to function in the criminal space, so people who are being prosecuted in the criminal punishment system, but really learned what we already kind of knew was reaffirmed, which is that people aren't just punished in these systems, in the criminal punishment system alone, but then they experience subsequent punishment through the immigration and deportation systems, or the quote unquote child welfare system, which we call the family regulation system, or the foster care system. All of these systems work together to punish people who are accused of having self-managed their abortions. So this could look like starting deportation proceedings, setting immigration bond. It could look like trying to sever parental rights between a parent who's been accused of having self-managed in the family court system. So making sure we provide that kind of support. And then, really, I think we think of our support as more holistic than just throwing money at a problem. Not that resources aren't useful, of course, but that there are such large issues at play in these particular criminalizations and criminalization in general. So as a former public defender, for instance, I know that a judge might be reticent to set a lower amount of bail or release someone on their own recognizance if they don't have access to safe housing or a cell phone, because their argument allegedly is that this person is unreachable, unlikely to come back to court. And so then we're like, okay, we'll pay for your cell phone, we'll pay for the cost of your housing, and now tell us that you can't release this person. And so really trying every step of the way to push the courts to remove the conditions on people, make them less onerous, and get them back in their community as soon as we can. The other thing is that, of course, when you pay bail for someone, once they're out of jail, what we know is that most defenders will tell you this, that what's on the table in terms of what prosecutors are willing to offer really changes if someone is outside of jail. And it's a gross fact, but it's true that prosecutors feel like they have more leverage when someone is incarcerated, and it means that they can overcharge. They overcharge more, and then maybe when someone is released, they're more likely to say, okay, we can't fight this with the way that we thought we could because this person actually has some resources, and then it changes the outcome in a tangible legal way. So there's all sorts of ways that our support shows up. Did you have a question, Jocelyn, before I continue? No.
No, it was like, oh, wow.
Right? So gross. So gross.
So disgusting. Yeah.
Yep.
It's more remodeling of white supremacist actions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just a function of the same desire to control people's bodies that's at play throughout this landscape. Okay, so that's a little bit about the kind of support we provide. Really, it's there so that people, if you have a case where you or someone you know is being criminalized for a pregnancy outcome, maybe there are allegations of having self-managed an abortion, those aren't always as explicit in these cases, right? Only like whether there's an explicit law for the criminalization of self-managed abortion or not, even in places where there aren't explicit laws criminalizing people, prosecutors across the country have criminalized people. And so really, the goal is, if you know about this, if this is someone you know, if you're a helper in one of these cases where you try to help someone get an abortion and you're being criminalized or otherwise punished, please reach out to us and see if we can help you out. Okay, so that's the RLDF. What is self-managed abortion, which is, I guess, a step back. So self-managed abortion is really any abortion someone does by themselves without engagement with the formal medical system. In practice, it could look exactly the same. So in states where telehealth is allowed, someone might get a prescription, get medication. That would not be considered a self-managed abortion because it's technically still within the formal medical system. But throughout the world, people have been self-managing their abortions for as long as pregnancy has existed. Today, more people in the United States are ending pregnancies at home without involving a healthcare provider. We just learned from Erin about the medical safety and effectiveness of medication abortion pills. And so really any concerns about self-managed abortion, which, like I said, are largely through pills nowadays, is any concerns about any medical concerns are clearly a farce, because even within telehealth, we know that people are really managing their abortions at home the same way. In practice, it's looking the same. It's really not so much about a medical concern. It's very much about a legal concern, about a desire to control people's reproductive autonomy, prevent people from making decisions about their own bodies, create a culture of fear where people think that self-managing your abortion without a medical provider is somehow wrong and more illegal, when that's not the case. So what is the real risk of SMA? I would say arguably a legal one. And really, unfortunately, despite the medical safety, I think a lot of medical providers unfortunately report the folks that come through for allegedly self-managing an abortion because they think that they have some responsibility as mandated reporters to report folks. And this couldn't be more wrong, right? There's nothing per se wrong about self-managing your abortion. The medical providers get it wrong all the time. And then prosecutors get it wrong all the time. And then judges get it wrong all the time. And so you can, scream at the top of your lungs about how something isn't worthy of criminalization, which is, in my opinion, really anything, but you can say that as much as you want, and it doesn't matter when people have been arrested, investigated, prosecuted, even if those cases end in dismissal, if you're lucky. By that point, your world has been upended. You have been splashed all over the newspapers, your community, depending on where you're from, maybe part of why you decided to use SMA as the avenue for you anyway. Maybe privacy was a huge concern. Maybe safety from an abusive partner was a huge concern. Regardless, it doesn't matter. Your life has now been put out there. And I think that by the time, you could have lost jobs because of an open case. These cases often come with bonkers high charges like homicide, manslaughter. And so when people are charged with those things, they have these cases that are open for a long time. And in the course of those cases, regardless of a positive outcome, regardless of whether someone's in jail or outside of jail, they might have lost a job because of it. They might not. They might have open immigration proceedings or family court proceedings, which mean that they've already been separated from their child, which was their biggest concern in the first place, being able to adequately parent the child that they have. And so really, these systems are just so incredibly violent. It's hard to even really talk about it sometimes because it's so cruel. So we don't know why people choose to self-manage abortions. We don't know. No one really knows the circumstances of their life, but one can hazard some guesses, right? That the medical system, they distrust the medical system. If you're a trans person, for instance, you might really distrust the medical system because it has failed you over and over again. And so you might choose to be in the privacy of your own home. You might be in an abusive relationship where you want to end a pregnancy without consequence. And so that might be why you self-manage. It might be that you feel as a Black Muslim migrant, for instance, that your medical providers have looked at you with judgment, suspicion, racism, xenophobia, and therefore you don't want to go back there for your reproductive care. All of those are really valid reasons to not trust institutions. And in a landscape where your medical providers who are meant to care for you are reporting you, it makes a lot of sense why people might choose to self-manage. It might be a question of lack of clinical access, right? We know that there's been a huge movement to ensure that people's access to clinical abortion is severely limited in this country. So it might be because of that. You might not be able to take a day off of work the same way to travel. It's expensive. There's a multitude of reasons, right? But how we end our pregnancies, whether we go to a healthcare provider or manage our own abortions, the point is we need to be able to do that with safety, with dignity, without fear of being arrested, without fear of being investigated, without fear of being jailed. And, it's no accident that criminalization is expensive. Bail is high for a reason. People are, the weight of the state is no small feat to fight. This is not an attack that began right now. This is not something that's going to begin after Roe is obliterated. This is something that's been happening. This is something that organizers have been talking about for a long time, specifically in the repro justice space. And so really, this is the culmination of a systematic attack for decades in this country against people. And again, like I said, even though there might not be explicit laws around the criminalizing of self-managed abortion, prosecutors try to make anything stick. And so, in any case that I've ever prosecuted, I've never prosecuted a case. Any case that I've ever defended, prosecutors charge people with anything that sticks. And so you could be charged with assault laws, archaic laws about concealing a birth. It doesn't matter. Where there's a will, there's a way, and prosecutors have, in fact, prosecuted people nationally. And then my biggest pet peeve, which I'm going to stop and give you a break to ask me any questions, but my biggest pet peeve is then when we have these like self-aggrandizing, quote unquote, progressive prosecutors coming out there and saying, oh, look, pat me on the back, I'm not going to prosecute these cases. It's like, well, thank you for telling me you're not going to continue to break the law in your prosecutions, right? But it was never in your purview to do this anyway. These were never legal prosecutions to begin with. But I'm so glad you've decided to announce that you won't continue to prosecute the way that you are so comfortable prosecuting in most cases, regardless of the law.
Are you finding what is it like this year versus the last couple of years in terms of people reaching out for help right now? Are people becoming more comfortable to reach out and ask for this assistance, or is there a stigma against that, would you say?
So the Repro Legal Defense Fund has only existed for a year. And so in our pilot phase, we've seen a lot of things, right? And I think the biggest issue is that I think a lot of people didn't know about SMA, is what I'm finding, and that suddenly people are sort of more politicized around it. I think people are understanding why it's less sort of salacious maybe than even I started, where people are more willing to like hear about it as something that's a question of accessibility, because they're suddenly now seeing that there's a world that we're talking about in which abortion access could be severely limited. I think that people's reaching out has been a lot of confusion about what the leaked SCOTUS decision means, what the obliteration of Roe will mean. And I am happy to talk about that a little bit, but to answer your question, we have a helpline, the Repro Legal Helpline, which I really recommend if
Awesome.
somebody.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
It is awesome.
I have nothing to do with that, so I'm not going to take credit. But
we met Kebe. The Womxn Project has worked with Kebe before, and we're in awe of meeting her and then hearing about the work. And it's just thrilling to have you all merged together, doing this work together.
Yeah, no, it's a joy to be in the same organizational workspace. I think that they do an incredible job, and we think of really sort of this relay race that we do, where, you know, before, if you have a question about your legal rights, call the Repro Legal Helpline. If you know that you're being investigated or arrested, call them or reach out to us and we can help you, really making sure there are no gaps in our support. But what the Repro Legal Helpline really learned is that as soon as I believe it was like right at the beginning of the pandemic, the numbers went up sort of tenfold in terms of how much people wanted information. And so accessibility is obviously what changed in the pandemic. And so we know that shifts how much people reach out to us. But I think for the most part, the questions we've gotten are some concern. So the leaked Supreme Court opinion obviously is a leak. It's not an actual decision, which means people can still get abortions the same way that they could before the leak.
Right.
So I think that's helpful for people to often hear that it's not the most comforting, because you know that this decision is like right around the corner.
Yeah.
In terms of the decision, you know, I think that it's a little bit more attenuated, and also that doesn't mean that makes it less likely. So it's a little bit more attenuated in that obliteration of Roe doesn't necessarily mean that people will suddenly have to experience the full. People who have abortions will be targeted for criminalization, right? That's the stated sort of a position, is that like it's providers, etc. Unclear how things are going to shake out. In part, we know that criminalization and prosecution is about culture. Prosecutors don't punish things that they think are too politically costly to punish because they're elected officials, and very simply, and prosecutors do prosecute things that they have traction for.
Yeah.
And so depending on where you are in the country or who you are or whatever the political bend of the prosecutor is, which is often what determines what's prosecuted, I can imagine a culture of criminalization, fear, surveillance, making people feel like this is illegal and wrong, will mean that people who have abortions will also be criminalized and will be targeted by the state through the prosecutorial system.
Mm-hmm.
Even if those cases get dismissed, like I said, right? Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, yes, it matters whether someone's incarcerated after a sentence or not, but also by it doesn't matter, I just mean a lot of harm happens before that point. And so that's scary enough. And so And, you know, there's a concern about the trigger laws. Like, will this immediately mean that people who have abortions are criminalized, you know, or are in some way targeted? And again, a lot of these laws have been written for that not to be the case. And so I both want to hold that piece and hold that, like, we should be really cautious to trust the people who are telling us this, in part because I think a culture of prosecution is really the problem here, a culture of surveillance and prosecution. And I think my biggest fear is, regardless of whether it's civil or criminal or whatever, like, if you live in New York, you hear the subway, go see something, say something, meaning tell on your communities, right? And that's the thing that really scares me, is like, yes, there will be more surveillance. And what I mean by that is not just all the tools that we know to surveil us, we will surveil each other. The whole point is that you turn against your communities. All of this is meant to make us less strong in our relationships and sever our communities. And so I think that's the really scary part, is that you're pitting people against each other. You're telling people to tell on each other. Just creates a real culture of fear and surveillance around the systems that should actually be serving you, much like doctors, you know?
Right. Well, we're starting to get a handle on it in the Rhode Island space, which is where I'm based. And our partners in Louisiana have a completely different situation in terms of how they're dealing with it. And so I think it's an interesting idea or cross-section of how this country is going to have to adapt. And a lot of us up here in the North are on call to say, how can we help and be of assistance and be ready to pivot if need be. And you all are one of the organizations that we will be pushing forward and being like, okay, this is a resource, use it. I ask from maybe an organizational standpoint, are you all staffing up further? Are you becoming a more robust team so that you can be prepared for this time in history, this incredibly horrific time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think that we luckily started building out a year ago. And so we beefed up by March is when we hired new staff, before we knew this was coming officially, but because we knew it was coming,
Sure.
right? Sure. I think, you know, one of the lessons that I've learned in the process of the Repro Legal Defense Fund and working at If, When, How is that it's really important to listen to what organizers have been saying, and really trust their lead. And that having to start new things in a moment of crisis is not ideal, because you are traumatized, you are trying to scramble for resources. There's something to be said about coming to work with relative steadiness. And so I think we had the space to do a lot of our building and our infrastructure beforehand, right before. And so now I feel privileged in a way that I've never felt in a movement space before, which is that to know something is coming, to prepare for it. And of course, never have enough preparation. I imagine things are going to be, I can't tell the future, but I imagine I will always feel inadequate in response to criminalization. So it's not to say that, but it is also to say that, like, God damn, what if we'd been listening to like Black women talking about reproductive justice years and years ago and then funded and resourced those folks? It's just kind of heartbreaking, right? Like, I think our racism has really done us injustice
with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you talked about white supremacy earlier, because it's the same fucking people wanting to, you know,
it's the consolidation of power, controlling bodies in every which way. And I mean, the criminal system is one, and then reproductive justice is another. Goes hand in hand.
And the people that are happening nationally with these hundreds and hundreds of, you know, we're talking about just these deep coordinated attacks about people taking their healthcare into their own hands. And it's cool.
It is. Well, we're so grateful to have a little bit of time with you tonight, both of you. I know that it's not easy, and we appreciate it. For anyone who's able to use this, and we will share a lot of these clips in terms of getting it out and sharing it in smaller bite-sized chunks as well for folks. And I'll wrap up here, unless either of you have anything you'd like to end on. I think one thing that we often ask a lot of our organizational volunteers is, like, you know, what is the call to action that you're feeling in your heart, or what is the moment of action? And I think you both answered it in so many ways. It's like beyond on call, but I think one thing I'm taking away from what you both are saying too is, you know, we have to give ourselves a chance to just feel and process. and maybe this is a hard question, but I do come back to this too for my folks. And where is the hope that you both see in this? Is there a silver lining? I like to look for that. I try to look for that, not always the easiest. And then I think to pair with that, I would ask Erin if you could pop back on too. That's a question. And then one last question would be too, with that is like, what's one concrete thing that you would empower activists to take away and do? So the first would be, where's the hope in this? Do you see a hope or a possible, yeah. I mean, I asked this to our federal delegation, and it was a really nice moment because these folks all said, they were like, the other side's not tired. They're like, people say they're tired, and they're like, but they're emboldened. And if we need something that gives us a point of strength, it's to know that we have this. It was a little contentious, but there was like, the hope is that we can get to that place of action and feel like we can keep going. And I was like, all right, thank you, federal delegation. But what would both of you say?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and just really appreciate the conversation with Rafa and everything that has been transpiring. And thank you for this question. So first off, like, I'm not going to silver lining overturning.
I guess that's not
it's
the right
unmitigated disaster, and it's hateful, and it will hurt so many people in this country, especially Black and brown people, especially undocumented folks, queer folks, low-income folks. Like, I'm truly terrified. Every day that we have a SCOTUS decision day, I show up however I show up and how my body wants to show up. And so some days I'm like listening to like really angry music while I'm watching SCOTUS blog go. Other days I'm like listening to like super feminist music, and I'm like, I got this, like, peace out. Like this morning, I felt like I was going to vomit. And so it really kind of depends on how we're showing up. And that's okay. It's okay to be upset about this. It's okay to be like, this just sucks, and there's nothing valid about this. Yeah. But I will say long-term, Roe was always the floor and never the ceiling. And Roe effectively fell for huge swaths of this country many decades ago. When you look at the Hyde Amendment, pushing abortion care out of reach, the abortion bans that have been happening in the state. And again, I really just want to center, especially people of color who have just not had the access to reproductive health care that has been enjoyed by many wealthy white women. It's just a very different landscape in this country. But with this new moment, the charge that we have as activists, so I still have joy in my heart as a human being and as an activist. I still believe we're going to win. I believe it's going to take a really long time, and it's going to get bad and worse and worse. But I do think our movement will win and prevail in the long run. And that is the hope that I hold on to in my heart, that that as we build back, we can, to borrow a term that and radicalize it, we can build back better, and we can actually get abortion should be free and funded. I want to see abortion pills like free in the bowls that are at the resource centers, the LGBTQ resource centers, and the women's center. Like, make it really available. And really, I think again, just to go back to the conversation that you all have been having, that we are at a moment where white supremacy is being called into question, and abortion bans are absolutely a core strategy of white supremacy in this country. So let's just take the whole rotten apple and throw it out.
Okay, Rafa, tag.
No, I love it. I love it. Burn it down.
I know. That's great.
I'm like, I mean, I think when it comes to prisons, or when it comes to repro work, I'm like, burn it all fucking down. Never been good enough to start off with, not something we can fix. I mean, again, I'm not going to silver lining it for sure, because I think that's maybe, and I don't even think that's really what you meant, Jocelyn. I think what you
it wasn't.
There's
the hope. I think that there can be hope, and I think go ahead.
No, but right, like what does, now that this is our reality, where do we go from here? And can we shift things? And I think, yes, we can probably talk about starting over and scratching some things like Erin so brilliantly said. And then I think, I think unfortunately and sadly, but through hardship sometimes come some really creative responses, and I'm sure there will be a multitude of those, and I just have love for all the people trying all the ways that they can. I also I'm seeing a lot more connections between movements in a way that needed to have happened a long time ago and was happening for people a long time ago, depending on who you are. And so, I have love for the newly politicized, and I also just want to have love for the folks that are tired and have been holding it down for a while. But that defunding the police, that's a repro issue. That's not a thing people were talking about a few months ago, I think in the sort of mainstream, the way that hopefully it seems to me people are talking about more and more. And I like that. I like people talking about a bodily autonomy in a broader way. I like people being thoughtful about how they talk about pregnant people. I love the connections that I'm just seeing between movement spaces generally. But again, it's really hard to be thank you for giving us the opportunity to be creative is really not what I mean at all.
No, I get it. It's a little tricky. It's tricky. I have hope in my 12 and 9-year-olds generations where you see these kids who are let's go out and rally and let's go hold up signs. And my heart hurts because I don't want to have to leave anything to them that they're doing these kind of fights for. But wow, the high school generation, the college generations right now, these folks are showing up in ways that are rock and roll out here. And that gives me a ton of hope too, because I want to acknowledge the second generation feminists. I want to acknowledge the folks who have been fighting since Roe, who are tired and crying and sitting on the sidelines and saying, I don't want to do it. Some aren't doing that. Some are totally there with us and coaching us and telling us where to be and do. But I think it's going to take all of us in different ways, and whatever way we can bring the fire in the positive way. So I want to acknowledge, what you're both saying about allyships and new collaborations. I want to acknowledge partnerships like the one that the Womxn Project's been building with the Louisiana Coalition for Reproductive Freedom and many of our state partners. I want to thank both y'all's organizations for doing incredible national work and being educators as well as being support systems in many different ways. We're all here to continue up this fight, and we're ready to be available to push the ways that we're going to need to pivot and do this dance and figure out how to make the next steps work. So thank you. I will make I'll give you both a little insight into where we are, but I'm speaking to my folks out here in Rhode Island that there will be many opportunities for us here. Still, our session's not over. And we have opportunities coming in the coming weeks. We're fighting here in Rhode Island against the Hyde Amendment ourselves. And so we're fighting for race equity. We're not fighting for abortion, as we say. I mean, at this point, we've passed the right to have an abortion in Rhode Island, and now we're fighting for the access for all. And so we are fighting up against a General Assembly that in a majority agrees that this should be a right. And we have leadership and committee chairs who refuse to allow anything to happen. And it's this designated small racist few. And so we are calling on our voters to support the policies that are focusing the all rather than some, and basically calling on the majority of our lawmakers to get this bill across the finish line this year. So join us in speaking out and showing up in ways that work for you. If you can make a call or send an email about a policy to ensure abortion access or healthy pregnancies can, happen, go for it, do it in your state, reach out to these orgs to help point you to where you need to go. But even as something as simple, and I just say this to a friend of mine who's just starting to run for school board, and I'm very proud of him. But I encourage people to attend school board meetings and push for truly compassionate, comprehensive sex ed in schools. Research the candidates running for office in our areas and see where they stand. There's so much more we can all do, large and small, and we all do have a true role to play. It's just finding what fits us. So let's do it. Let's take care of ourselves and each other, keep fighting for our rights. And thank you again, ReproAction and Rafa from the Legal Defense Fund. We appreciate you both so much. And we're excited to be in this fight with you. So thank you both.
Thank you for having us. And Erin, it's so nice to be in this space with you. Of course, you're phenomenal.
Oh, Oh,
Yay!
pleasure. Right back at you, both of you. So thank you so, so much. And we're gonna win this. It'll take a long time, but we're gonna win this.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Thanks, y'all. Take it easy. Have a good night, everybody out there in the interwebs, and be well and safe. Bye-bye.